Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Sarter with FEMA Region 4, and welcome to our Hurricane Season Primer, a Region 4 webinar series, A More Resilient Tomorrow. First, I'd like to thank Tracy Sempier and her team at the Mississippi-Alabama Sea Grant Consortium for being wonderful partners. We couldn't do this without them. I'd also like to mention that we do have a Q&A box. If you have any questions throughout, please feel welcome to put them in whenever you have them. We will probably answer these questions at the end, depending on time. There's also a closed captioning button at the bottom available if you need it. I'd like to next thank our two wonderful guests, Brandon Belinsky, who is our Hurricane and GIS Manager for FEMA Region 4, and also Rebecca Moulton, who's the FEMA Region 4 Meteorologist. I'd like to turn it over to them it's going to be a great presentation. Thank you all.
Thanks, Matthew. Hey, good afternoon. I'm glad to be here. I'm having some technical difficulties with my slides turning very slowly, so bear with me here. I'm not sure if it's because I'm in Zoom or what, or I'm just too excited to get through these slides. As Matthew mentioned, I'm the Hurricane Program Manager for the region here. Rebecca will be speaking later as the Regional Meteorologist. And we get to deal with all things weather a lot of times, but really focus on hurricanes because that is a big hazard for our states in Region 4. And obviously the topic is pretty on our minds these days as we are starting the hurricane season off this week. And when asked to do this presentation originally, a lot of what we do is kind of behind the scenes, if that makes sense. So we figured probably the most pertinent and great information for y'all as we enter the season is hearing again, if you haven't already heard it, the product and service updates from National Hurricane Center and what they're doing differently this year, some of those new services and new products, and what do they mean to us as emergency managers and as folks who have to make decisions or understand our risks as we go through the hurricane season. So most of this presentation is from theirs. We stole it from them, but I'd like to just talk about those different products and what does it mean to us. So with that, looking at some of those changes for this season, the 34 and 50 knot wind radii forecast, those are the tropical storm force winds, and the 50 knot or the strong tropical storm force winds that they're going to be putting forecasts out to days 4 and 5. They currently have a 4 and 5 day forecast for the point, but they don't have those wind radii, and we'll talk why that's important for us for the season. The watches and warnings being issued on intermediate advisories might seem kind of ho-hum, what's the big deal? But it will make a difference on how they and when they issue watches and warnings on our kind of battle rhythm as we roll through a possible hurricane making landfall. Also, the Spanish language advisory text products are going to be out there to utilize to support more of our products and reaching more people. And some of the web links and public advisory hazard information. We'll talk a little bit about that and those great graphics. Some of the experimental products they're going to be working on this year, the inland watches and warnings on the cone graphic. Now, that's a mouthful, but what is that going to look like as they start putting that out in the middle of the season? And some rainfall graphics that they're going to be doing internationally just to be a little bit more consistent. I want to wrap up with the NHC or the Hurricane Center's product update with some of their 6 and 7 day track forecast intensity forecasts that they're going to be doing. I'm not going to talk much about the modification of wind warning definitions. That's something that's kind of being worked on and really nothing too clear yet, but they're trying to work on how that wording comes across and how to utilize that. Always trying to improve that communications part. So when we talk about wind radii, that's how big the storm is. They do try to get a feel for if the storm is getting bigger or smaller out in the forecast period. It's a hard thing to do, but they're getting better and better. So being able to look at these wind radii out 5 days, that those tropical storm force winds will be really nice for folks working on timing and understanding the size of the storm as it might be changing, which can happen obviously in 5 days of forecast. But it'll also make a big difference in other products like the wind speed probabilities. These will help inform some other products to be better to help us better at timing and understanding most likely and earliest arrival time of tropical storm force winds. Um, and it's just one of those that it's a small change, but can make a big difference, especially when we're thinking out 5 days. And that's a big change when you think just a few short years ago, we were just doing 3-day forecasts. So look for that and supporting timing. And if there's any power users out there of this information, folks that know HURREVAC, this will be that program will be displaying these and help us with that timing piece and understand beyond the 3-day period the timing of those winds, so we can start thinking about those timetables as we start making decisions. When we start talking about the watches and warnings on those intermediate advisories, what that does is it gets us away from some of those rules that the Hurricane Center had on only releasing those during the official full advisory. When there's a public advisory, forecast discussion, all those fun products that go along with it. And those are on the Eastern, in our Eastern time zone, delivered at 5 a.m., 11 a.m., 5 p.m., 11 p.m. But by having it on the intermediate advisories, they can get that timing a little bit closer and maybe not say, well, is 5 a.m. the time to put up a storm surge warning, or would it be better at 8 a.m. or same thing in the evening? Putting something out earlier in the evening as opposed to later could make a difference on getting the news cycles and getting that socialized as these watches and warnings are changing or being lifted for areas. So, and then as mentioned on the slide, sometimes forecasters do think about what this means by putting out warnings in the middle of the night, and this can help them adjust those times and give those warnings when they're needed at the right time, so they'll be heard. So that's a kind of a good news. Might seem small, but it'll make a difference for forecasting, and be looking for those at different times sometimes if you're concerned about that. Again, the Spanish language, Spanish advisories that'll be out there. The Hurricane Center is using AI to do these now, and it'll be faster, and they're going to be looking to expand these for other products possibly too. So for those who might have the need for Spanish translation, a lot of these products will be there. The public advisory is one of the key ones that has some of the key messages. Excuse me, the discussion has the key messages, and the public advisory has really good text product on what the storm is doing, the watches and warnings, really good summary of some of those key statements that need to get out there. So this is a good spot if you have any need for the Spanish language translations. One of the key things that the Hurricane Center has done in the past few years that we've seen a lot of improvements on is the hazards graphics. You can see some examples here that the Hurricane Center has implemented recently, the peak storm surge forecast, taking a very complicated storm surge forecast and a very complicated product and trying to really highlight the peak storm surge and where it is along the coastline. And this can be very detailed. And they try to describe all of this in a text product. And you can see here's an example on the right. A lot of different points and places broken down. And actually this season I believe there was an advisory that was so long with all these hazards listed that it kind of broke. They had to shorten it. They weren't used to having such a long product. So what they're going to do within the text products is actually have a link to where they can get all this information, and instead of listing every segment, and they'll just highlight those really key important parts of where the highest storm surge will be or where the highest rainfall will be. These are kind of the key products also for us as emergency managers to look at and see how it changes. We're always keyed in on the track and how that might change left or right, or it might change with timing, but the hazards are what we probably should also key on. So what is the storm surge going up or down, left or right, or more areas being involved? And then also the rainfall forecast. How does that look? What does that pattern look like? How is it changing? And you know, thinking about our inland locations also. So these are some key graphics that you'll see, and also these text products. So they're going to be adding those web links in the products this season. And then I left this update in here because I think there is some applicability um, of seeing these graphics and these forecasts of rainfall, not just over our traditional areas we're used to seeing or where we're concerned, especially for the islands. If you have any folks that have any interest in Puerto Rico or Virgin Islands, knowing that there is a band of very heavy rain offshore and moving towards you, that could be a big or a key part of information that can help with situational awareness. That yes, we only have a rainfall forecast of 1 or 2 inches, but there's a possibility of 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 inches that these graphics can highlight. So it just helps with the consistency of the products to see these rainfall, the rainfall hazard also. So that's going to be there, and we'll hopefully see those graphics from Hurricane Center's website also. This product update has been one of talk. On the left side is our standard tried and true error cone with the forecast along it and the watches and warnings. And there's something to be desired out of this. We see the storms moving through there and where the center of the storm is. But the hazards are also inland, especially in a state like Florida, where storms can maintain their intensity well inland. High winds, rainfall can be inland. So, and there are actually inland watches and warning products for that. But the experimental graphic will look more like the one on the right, where that'll have the same information of where the storm is, but also watches and warnings highlighted. I could see the implication for other downstream products to help support. It may be a Florida-centric watch warning to see those watch warnings and how they change for those areas also. Also notice that this is a 5-day forecast and that the entire cone is all solid white now. In previous years, they had the extended forecast in that hatch mark. So they're going to show it all white. Notice there is no track line on there, and they've kind of de-emphasized the cone with some lines. So this is part of the effort to move away from just focusing on the track or the air cone, which just shows a few things pertinent to the storm, and focus on the watches and warnings and the hazards of the storm. Notice the orange rings you see there around the center of the storm. Those are the extent of tropical storm force winds well outside the cone. And you can imagine as the storm moves along or it gets closer, that there's going to be hazards well outside that error cone that a lot of people use as a gauge whether or not they need to do anything. So I could see more further improvements on this too if I was to forecast out a few more years as we get more products and ways to communicate. So look for that. And this is going to be implemented mid-season, I believe. They're still working on that. And there might be some experimental graphics as they work out with the current storms. And that goes just as a plug for all these products you're seeing here. Sometimes the first times we see them or use them is during a real storm. So keeping tabs on the Hurricane Center's website, they'd always do a good job with communications of these products, hurricanes.gov. They will keep updates on these and making sure they're doing what they need to do. So just want to throw that out there with a lot of these new products. One of the great success stories of probably any kind of weather enterprise is that the track forecasts have improved so much over the past few years. One of the things they're looking at out in the next few years is extending that forecast track, that graphic I just showed you, out to 6 and 7 days. I know there's a lot of stuff going on with these graphics. Unfortunately, Rebecca and I look at these so much and we take them for granted. But one way to interpret these, I want to point out to y'all, if you're to look at the track graphic on the left side, if you look at the yellow line, that's our 72-hour track. You can see it goes back to 1990. But if you look about right when I started in the late 90s or so, you can see it's about that 200 mile forecast error, nautical mile error. And if you slide all the way to the right to 2022, you see it drives way down to about 100, so almost in half. The rule of thumb back in the day, just a few short years ago, 20 years ago, is that you can average the average air for a storm was 100 miles per day. So in one day, the average air was 100, 2 days, 200, 3 days, 300. And if you look back, that's what it was in the 90s and mid 90s, 300 miles of nautical air for day three. Look today, and it's down about 100. And this has consistently gotten better. And you can see, especially over the past 10 years, that improvement. Also on the intensity side, I know it's kind of all over the place there towards the end of it, but there is a consolidation and a lowering of those numbers. A lot of that is due to the forecast models. Our modeling has gotten better. Our observing is getting better, and we're able to see those improvements. So they're at the point now that they've been experimenting with that 6 and 7 day forecast. That's that bright blue and purple line there. And they're just as good as they were with the 5-day track error, and actually almost as good as 3-day error just 20, 30 years ago. So they're at a point where they're pretty good with that. What does that mean, though, for us as emergency managers, decision makers, and folks that have to deal with these storms, having a 6 and 7 day forecast? And what will that look like? Probably yet to be seen, but it could help us, give us that earlier notification. We can start watching those trends. Probably very beneficial for these longer track storms that come across the Atlantic, forming waves, especially for folks in the islands or Florida. Having that first look of where it is, as opposed to going to your favorite model page or some other website to find what might be happening beyond 5 days. So I think they're going to be good at this, and I think they're starting to communicate it now that this is something they want to do, and it's pulling their teammates and pulling their partners on how does this look, how do they want this to look, and is it going to be useful? So so far it's been a thumbs up on this, but something to think about as we move forward is, what do we do if we have a 6 and 7 day track forecast? And something the other thing about very, very hard on how they do this and how they implement it, and how they view it, and what products are available to that. So again, pretty awesome seeing these trends and how they've done really well. And any of that variability you see in there, every season's different. Some years are harder than others. There are storms that provide some learning opportunities, and it could be one or two storms that really mess with their errors, unfortunately. So pretty interesting things to come. Now, it wouldn't be a good hurricane season primer without talking about the seasonal forecast. This has been one of those things. Rebecca and I laugh and joke that, every year this is what people care about the most, that or the names, or what the first name might be. But what does the season bring for us? And the biggest talk lately is about the El Nino, La Nina conditions. That's always been in the media the past 10, 15 years, and a driver for our hurricane seasons. The bad news is El Nino is waning. It's near a neutral phase, what they call right now. And the forecast is for La Nina to be coming in to development in the peak of hurricane season, especially towards the end of season. Those chances are pretty high. That's those blue lines you see there. And to pick out your peak of hurricane season is in that JAS, or July, August, September, or August, September, October timeframe, in the middle of that graph, when there expect to be no El Nino and more La Nina chances. It might be transitioning that way. It might not be full on. But what that does mean for us on the hurricane side is there's less wind shear, basically, in the areas that hurricanes form. And they've seen that time and time again. Is it the only driver? No. We saw last year with an El Nino, which should not have been a big year, still have record numbers of tropical storms. So they're watching that very carefully. They know it can make a difference for the hurricanes in the development region that we tend to look. So that's one of the things we're looking at closely. The other thing is the ocean heat content, or how warm those waters are in the area that hurricanes form and track through. Another, unfortunately, more bad news is that these are still breaking records, and warmer than they were last year, and warmer than the average. That's that red line that we're tracking. It continues to move north of the areas from last year also. So we know that's also one of those driving factors for hurricanes. It provides a fuel basically for these storms. They need to have that warm water to get its derive their energy from. So again, not good news on that. Because of that, National Hurricane Center did put out their seasonal outlook, and they have a 85% confidence it's going to be above normal season, 10% near normal, and only 5% below normal. And that's as expected, given the factors that we've seen in the history. They give a range, as any good forecaster should, of named storms 17 to 25. Hurricanes, 8 to 13 of those named storms could be hurricanes, and 4 to 7 major hurricanes, so 111 miles an hour or greater. So not only a lot of hurricanes and storms, but also some major hurricanes in there too. This doesn't say anything to landfall, but obviously with more storms out there and the conditions given, that landfalls could be implied some. Not putting a number on that or where it's going to be, but it just means there's going to be a lot out there to keep tabs on and be ready for, and just diligent in watching all those products they already that we talked about it previously. So a lot going on with that. Just want to throw in this one last slide on the climatology side, or excuse me, on the seasonal prediction side. Hurricane Center, NOAA, is not the only ones doing it. Other government agencies, other private entities, and other universities are also seeing the same trend. The average being about 11 hurricanes forecasted for the season, when it's typically around the 6 to 8 area. So some of these forecasts are nearing double what average is, unfortunately. So a lot of people are seeing these signals, and the things to do is just understand those products that are out there to help us do our job, and where to get the right information from, and move forward with those kind of tried and true things, and not get too crazy over it, and that this is going to happen, and it's happened before, and we know where to go to get the right information to make the decisions we need to make. So good stuff. With that, I'm not going to take questions now, but we're going to take questions at the end. We're going to move to the next session with Rebecca talking about the HLT.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Brandon. Brandon and I have been doing this for a while, and I'll just add that we really do prepare the same every year, regardless of what the seasonal forecast says. We hear it, and then we move on and prepare and keep everyone ready just the same. So it's really not one of those to scare all of us, but just to keep us on our toes. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Hurricane Liaison Team. So the Hurricane Center, best in the world at the forecasting, but if we can't get the information out there, what does it mean? How do we use this information? How do we actually make smarter decisions? Back in the day, in the 1990s, the concept was really about getting information out there, because it was a different time that we didn't all have phones in our pockets. We were using fax machines, and it was a challenge to get official information out there. And we saw a few scenarios where there were surprise overnight rapid intensification or changes in the forecast, that without having people to communicate this information and reach out directly and talk person to person and say, hey, something's changing, you need to take action, a perfect forecast didn't mean very much. So this was the impetus for the idea of, how do we as emergency managers who bring together the decision makers and have some role in response and planning, how do we more effectively keep situational awareness, but also work with our partners in the community and help get that information out when we need it? So we now have lots of storms under our belt, and we have 2 full-time people at the National Hurricane Center who are FEMA employees of the Hurricane Liaison Team, whose year-round efforts then come into play when hurricanes are a possible threat. And obviously now it's not so much a question of, are we getting information out there? Everyone has plenty of information, but are we getting the right information? And how can we better help our partners understand and cut through some of the noise and use this information for our needs? Because there's so many more audiences than the Hurricane Center could possibly ever meet. So here's the mission: to improve our nation's capability to respond to hurricanes through the rapid exchange of critical information between the National Hurricane Center and the federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial emergency managers. Believe it or not, the National Hurricane Center their staff is smaller than you might think for some of these storms, and they're all busy. You've got forecasters, and they need to be doing their job focused on the forecast. And we on the Hurricane Liaison Team are able to do all of the conference calls, all of those sort of wraparound activities to take the forecast and then run with it on our side. Here's kind of a communication flow chart. It can be a little messy during an actual storm, but you have the Hurricane Center and the HLT station down there year round. During an actual storm, one of us is deployed down there as well, and we have that communication between us and the FEMA RCC. They're also in constant contact with the National Response Coordination Center at FEMA headquarters. And then we provide a critical lifeline to the states, and they're working closely with their local partners. And we're all able to incorporate our National Weather Service partners and really have that sort of holistic, comprehensive picture and help make sure everyone gets the same information, consistent message, same time. It gets the information as quickly as we possibly can get it out there. There's different operational levels. So right now we're at what we call our normal activation level. If something's out there, we might bump up a little bit, start sending emails, fielding calls, be asked to help provide either a forecaster on a briefing or coordinate additional briefings tailored to either questions at headquarters or at the regions. Usually when it starts to become something where we're looking at possible evacuations, we might bump up to a level 2. And this operational level is really, we're looking at, okay, there's a coordination element. There is some support that might be requested potentially from a state. We're probably looking at evacuations. But again, we're already doing things ahead of this, regardless of what's happening, because all of these levels feed into the next. We can't just come in one day from vacation and all of a sudden start to respond effectively. It takes a lot longer to be able to effectively respond to all of this. And then at the peak, when you either have major hurricane, multi-state evacuation scenario, or very significant scenario, you might have 24/7 round-the-clock support, or mirroring whatever the operations are to support the FEMA teams in the field and in the regions and at headquarters. So like Brandon and I are here in Region 4, which covers the Gulf and Southeast coasts. We have teammates across the country along the other coastlines in all of the hurricane-prone states. And not only do they have those relationships with our state partners and the local partners, but they have technical knowledge. At this point, we feel like we have almost an encyclopedia of knowledge about some of the storms that have hit across our states and how long it takes them to evacuate, where those zones are, what those best practices are. But if you put me in another region, like Region 6, I would have no idea. I would know where to get it. And that's one of the reasons why our tools are so helpful. But really, it's from having those two people who year-round work with our partners. As the meteorologist here in Region 4, we've found some success in this model and actually have been successfully able to apply it to other hazards as well. And I joke that it's everything pretty much except volcanoes here in the Southeast, but I may stop joking about that because, you know, it's just getting a little too real. So I don't know, just talking about earthquakes this morning, and it just reminds you that weather really does, it could potentially be a critical factor in almost everything we do. So some of the responsibilities that happen behind the scenes that you may or may not have seen before, in real time, there are a lot of questions that come in. And again, the Hurricane Center director, that's Director Michael Brennan, before he was where he is today. This is an example, actually that's Ida, so I think he was, it doesn't matter. Anyway, he's busy, he's on CNN, they're doing a lot of high profile senior executive federal calls and things where people were making really critical decisions, but the most important calls they'll tell you are to some of our state partners who are closest to making the call and helping people really who have got to make those evacuation calls. They know how hard that is, but they just simply can't be everywhere at all times. So we help them provide, whether it's a conference call and getting the right partners together to hear the information. Our Hurricane Center partners are very open and receptive and wanting to be in as many of those as they possibly can and provide guidance. You'll frequently hear them be able to sort of tease out, looks solid, and I might wait a little bit on this. And you learn over time that you can infer just as much about what we don't know. That's still information. So all of this goes into improving the messaging that then helps the Hurricane Center improve what they do as well. That's most of what we came here to share with you today. There's a lot more that, the Hurricane Program covers, but that's really the nuts and bolts of what you probably care about for this season. Taking all of the behind the scenes, who, what, where, when, why, how of hurricane evacuations and hurricanes, and really what happens when the rubber hits the road, so to speak, when we are focused on something that might potentially be affecting our SLTT partners. I know that was a ton of information in a short amount of time. So we can turn it back over to Matt and Tracy. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to take those.
We do have one question. So if visiting Florida, how do you know your evacuation zone? How do you find your evacuation route?
That's great. The best thing to do is hopefully you can find your county you live in. Know the county, and each county has a great website, emergency management website that has that prominently displayed usually, and to know your zone. So some actually have full know your zone campaigns. So a quick search on your county and emergency management is a great way to get at that. And as far as evacuation routes, that is a personal thing. You might not have to evacuate. Remember that. You might not be in an evacuation zone. Not all Florida is. There's a lot of safe places to be. The key actually is not just finding your evacuation route, but having a plan of where you want to go. If you do determine you're in an evacuation zone and you think you need to evacuate and you're told to evacuate, knowing whether it be a friend or family or a place to go that's not too far is your first bet. That's a first good choice. You may say, I want to get far away as possible, but that could be lead to other fun things like traffic jams and no place to stay and no gas. So that's a good point to just being ready for hurricane season, understanding those zones, whether or not you need to go, and then start understanding where's my safe place to be and putting that plan together.
I would just add that Florida Division of Emergency Management has a very comprehensive website, and it's great for mobile. So you mentioned visiting. You can go to their website right now and check out, I wanted to get it right for you, floridadisaster.org/know. And that gives you a picture of some of the evacuation zones. And so the big thing is if you are in an area and you hear on the television or on whatever your favorite modality is that you receive information on, if you hear that there's an evacuation ordered, listen to what they tell you to do, because they are very effective at getting that information out there. And like Brandon mentioned, you may not be asked to evacuate. And if that's the case, then they want you to stay where you are so you don't clog up the roads, evacuate tens of miles, not hundreds of miles, that type of thing. But they also have a very comprehensive website at Florida DEM, and you can sign up for alerts as well. So if you are visiting, for a week, you might sign up for the alerts. So you'd get them from Florida DEM.
Wonderful. We have another question from Silvana, and it is asking about how do people know that drainage will continue after winds and rain stops? And they're kind of asking, how do people know about the after effects? What's the messaging? Not directly what's related to, the storm coming directly through, but the after effects.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's where you have to really find those trusted sources of information. Your local weather service office or your local news office, but finding those trusted sources. And again, that county also can be, if you're looking for specific orders, or if there's certain after effects that the county is pushing out messages on, knowing your county emergency management page and their official social media accounts. They do a really good job at pushing that information out to the citizens. That's probably your best bet right there, is looking for your local sources of information.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think that question, and Brandon, what he mentioned really speaks to the fact that for so long, people focused on the category of the storm and the wind speed as the thing that they really thought about as the most dangerous part of the hurricane. And the nice thing about winds is when the storm moves, the winds are done. But we've seen more and more the local impacts from water, from storm surge, from heavy rainfall, from river flooding can last for days and be far away from where the hurricane is actually making landfall, and then continue well after the storm has passed. That's what we saw for Hurricane Ian. And, we've seen this with many others, and go well inland as well. So it's a big problem, and it's a little bit complicated when it comes to some of those hazards. It's not as straightforward. The nice thing about the Hurricane Center is you've got one office who's doing one thing for the hurricane, and they will continue to issue forecasts and products for a while, but at some point they'll hand that over. So your local weather service office and sometimes some others, that they will all link to each other, have the best information when it comes to like flooding and river flooding and some of those more long-term things that we don't necessarily always think of right away when we think of hurricanes.
Thank you. And we do have a question that this presentation will be emailed out, and we will email this out to attendees. And also on the Mississippi-Alabama Sea Grant Consortium YouTube page, there will be a recording, a couple weeks probably, but feel free to go there and share their YouTube page to see this recording and other past recordings we've done for webinars. Is there any other questions in the chat? Seeing that there is no more questions, I want to thank Brandon, Rebecca, for being wonderful panelists today, and really going over for the hurricane season. And the hurricane, we can't thank you enough, and thank you, Tracy. We do have another webinar that will be coming in July, July 10th, and is with the Miami-Dade County Heat Chief Officer. And we're really excited. They're going to be talking about how can communities really adapt to heat, and what is Miami-Dade they're doing in specific to really address these hazards. This is one of those things that's been coming up more often about heat stress, and so I hope to see you all there on July 10th. If you guys have any questions to our team, we'll put in the stakeholder relations email in the chat. But if not, thank you all for attending this webinar. We hope to see you guys next time, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you.